In the Seattle Times. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was about to praise your talents here.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, not far away. This is a statement I wrote about the series and a drawing called Old Man Praying, which has this bearded religious man with a tallis, the prayer shawl on, holding some sort of prayer book or study book. It was in the 7th or 8th drawing I did in the series. Pen and ink, 1993. And I'm going to read the blurb I wrote that accompanies each drawing for the visitors here. Drawn from one among many photographs of children playing, standing, or sitting on the sidewalks, or leaning against building walls in the Warsaw Ghetto. The second drawing I did in the series is called Man with Tattered Coat. Dates from very late 1991, January, February, so 92. And it says, drawn from a photo of a man, perhaps in his 30s, whose coat appears to be unraveling everywhere, exposing layers of fabric on the insides of the garment. I was struck by his gaze directly into the camera's lens, and his look, which was not dissimilar to young homeless men I see in downtown Seattle every day. As in photos of other people, he was sitting on the sidewalk waiting. Next to the drawing of the man with tattered coat is a drawing called Father and Daughter from '93. It's pen and ink with a touch of colored pencil and watercolor. Drawn from a photograph of a young father holding his young daughter. This drawing was the second in the series to which color was added. Some works which followed were quite rich with color. Kind of poignant image, maybe people tell me.
Sorry.
This is a drawing of Giedel Lasky, who was the niece of Hannah Lauber, who lives in Seward Park in the south end of Seattle. Hannah Lauber was from Warsaw, was a survivor of both the Warsaw Ghetto and Majdanek and Auschwitz death camps, and Ravensbrück concentration camp, where she was sent to the war as the Germans retreated into Germany, taking prisoners with them. Her niece died at Majdanek about a month after they were captured, which was the 6th day of the uprising. And Giedel's aunt, Hannah Lauber, had photographs of some family members, because Mrs. Lauber had a An aunt herself had moved to Seattle in 1926 or so. So after Mrs. Lorber was liberated, she was able to get a visa, came to the U.S., to Seattle, and she was the only survivor in the area from the Warsaw area in Warsaw Ghetto, where I called her, used the drawing in the series. The drawing of Giedel shows Giedel when she was probably about a year old. The photograph was probably taken at 39 or so. Giedel was around 5, maybe early 6 when she was murdered. The wing. This drawing is one of the few drawings where I remember what the wings were that I used at the Burke Museum, where I drew the wings. They were Arctic tern wings. Even though she was a girl, they were drawn on a baby blue etching paper. A drawing of Rubinstein and a piece that I particularly relate to myself. I found the photograph at YIVO, the Jewish Research Institute Library in Manhattan, New York. And Rubinstein was a street performer, probably like a mime. He hailed from a shtetl, Jewish village somewhere in the province around Warsaw, and was deported to the Treblinka death camp in the summer of '42, where he was undoubtedly gassed on arrival. In the photograph I got from YIVO, he was standing there just like he is here. One arm was on one hip, and the other arm was up like this, and he had this ear-to-ear grin on his face. What distinguished him aside from that was an attire. He had wearing a beret, had a western shirt with a zip, snap pockets, fancy belt buckle, tapered like mime-style pants, and shiny shoes. What amazed me about Rubinstein was people were dying on the streets all over the ghetto, starvation and disease, and they were being yanked off the streets and taken to the cattle cars at the Umschlagplatz, where they sent people on the trains to the death camps. And Rubinstein did what he always did. He performed. And that to me, as a statement about an artist doing something remarkable, I have nothing but tremendous admiration, respect for what he did, and hopefully his death is less meaningless now that people will see this. It's published and so on. He was viciously beaten by the Gestapo during an interrogation, and was reported to have lost his reason after that. And speculatively, I think that the only reason he was probably interrogated by the Gestapo was that he was a street performer, and in that sense, it made him an unusual target for them and their craziness, their madness. So that's it. This is a portrait of Sesha Verston-Mendrelowska. It's the second drawing I did, and the other one in the exhibit that depicts a murdered relative of someone in Seattle. And Sesha was born, the family thinks, in 1910. She perished during the uprising. Sesha's niece and great-niece and great-nephew live here. I'm friends with the great-niece, Hannah, who gave me the photograph. Similarly to Mrs. Lorber in the drawing of Giedel, the Seattle family here had a relative. In this case, Hannah's grandmother moved to the States in the 1920s, corresponded with the rest of the family back in Warsaw. In this case, all of Sesha's siblings all perished, and but Hannah's grandmother corresponded with all the family back there and had photographs as well. So they had a photograph of Sesha, which they gave me to use in the series. And according to Hannah, the great niece, according to her mom, Sesha's niece, Hannah was captured during the uprising and executed. And so she's about 33 years old here when she was murdered. And that's it. There's a little bit of colored penciling in some areas of the feathers here, otherwise it's mainly a black and white ink drawing. Sesha's spouse actually survived the war and lived in Canada afterwards. I don't know what's happened to him since. Segan, I'm in my studio in downtown Seattle, where the other drawings from the Under the Wings of God series are. This is the Mironov tram car, which is the first drawing I did in the series. It was of the tram car which evidently began or ended at Mironovska Street in the ghetto. And as we move up here, this is a child with waxed wings. And here we have the large drawing. This is number 10 in the series, 3 Jews jumping to their deaths during the uprising. We have the whole thing here. We move down to, this is a young man with a container helping an old man to walk. And then to its left is from a widely reproduced famous photograph of 2 women during the uprising after their capture. Initials for the Jewish Fighters Organization in the lower left, ZOB. And there they are on the border. I've drawn the lyrics, or painted I should say, it's watercolor and gouache with ink, for Hatikva. And this is meant to give the symbolic meaning of from ashes to rebirth with the state of Israel. There's a scene in the ghetto from one of the books I've been using. This is the identity papers I got at YIVO in New York in June of '93. And then I've done a 2-part. His name is Friedrich Zellman, and it's just awaiting his wings. The drawings are one above the other right now, but when they're completed, they'll be hung side by side. It's the in German and Polish, the written part of his Judenrat. It was his work papers. 2 children on a ghetto street, what I call the Lodi Eskimo drawing. The signage there, which predates the ghetto in the upper left, Lodi is ice cream. Of course, Eskimo Americans are familiar with from Eskimo bars. I've stitched Star of David on a late 19th century book cover there. Reflected light here. I turn the light off there. We'll see if I can get this any better here. A little bit. And this is called Smiling Man with Single Wing. Sicker and firm boy in a pedicab with a middle-aged woman with quilt. It's supposed to be leaping ponies or doggies on the bottom there. The photograph of this man was in the exhibit. He's been waiting his wings. They will be done shortly. I simply called Man with a Violin. Out a great deal of reflection, but the angles are going to be to the side and bottom. Photograph of a street scene looking like summer in the ghetto, probably the first summer. And that would have been 91, 92. That's the drawing. 3 principal figures, children that were in the foreground. 2 standing children, a girl and a boy, held with soup plate. Photograph of what I call child lifting head of man who died in the street. And here's my drawing of it. So I can get out of the reflected light here. Can't get it frontally, but that's okay. And this is another piece of someone from the photographs that were taken by one of General Stroop's soldiers. General Stroop was the officer in charge of the destruction of the ghetto. Thankfully was hung in Poland in 1951 for war crimes. And I call this Jewish fighter after capture, the Balkan dress drawing. She's wearing a very beautiful looking embroidered blouse of some sort. This is one of the first pieces I added a little bit of color in. Man with Talus, which is a very large triptych